Summer 2008. General Motors turns 100. For the best part of that century, the company was led by titans of business. One, a Time Man of the Year. Another, tapped to be the Secretary of Defense. But now, the fate of GM is in the hands of two men who spent their entire careers on top of a company in decline. CEO Rick Wagner and President Fritz Henderson. And both men know a grim reality. Vehicle sales are plummeting, the company is almost out of cash, and no bank will lend them money. So they turn to Washington with a plea and a threat. Without help,
the cost would be catastrophic in jobs lost, income lost, government tax revenue lost.
But the nation is suffering from bailout fatigue, and their pleas are met with anger over the use of private jets to come to Washington for help.
It's almost like seeing a guy show up at the soup kitchen in high hat and tuxedo.
And their lack of any real plan.
My fear is that you're going to take this money and continue the same stupid decisions you've made for 25 years.
2 weeks later, they drive hybrids back to Washington, humbled.
We're here today because we made mistakes.
But a bailout bill dies in Congress, and the industry seems headed into the abyss. But 1 week before Christmas, President Bush gives in.
Allowing the U.S. auto industry to collapse is not a responsible course of action.
GM gets billions in bridge loans and 101 days to come up with a plan, pushing the ultimate verdict onto the next president.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
And with Barack Obama comes an automotive task force, and the man in charge, Steve Ratner, a former New York Times reporter turned investment banker. He'd made a fortune on Wall Street buying and selling distressed companies, and he raised millions for Democrats over the years.
Why you?
I'm probably not the right guy to ask that question of. For those of us who have financial or economic type of skills, this is certainly a moment when those are in demand.
While seemingly mild-mannered, Ratner is ruthless in tearing apart GM's plan.
But the plan that they've put forward is, in its current form, not strong enough.
They decide to give GM another loan and another 60 days, but Wagner will pay for it with his job.
Rick Wagner is stepping aside as chairman and CEO.
And Ratner is the one who tells him.
How did that conversation go?
And Rick is a very classy guy, and he was a real gentleman about it, and he understood exactly why it was necessary, and maybe didn't fully agree, but accepted it.
Taking over is the son of a Buick salesman. Fritz Henderson spent his entire career at GM, mostly in finance and fixing operations overseas.
Rick Wagner was seen as a great guy. Henderson is sharper elbows and is much more willing to make very bloody decisions, very tough decisions.
Over the next 2 months, Henderson and the task force decide that bankruptcy is the only option.
Give us another chance. The GM that many of you knew, the GM that in fact had let too many of you down, is history.
How had GM let people down?
We didn't always provide our best products into the market. We didn't always put our best foot forward in terms of business decisions. And then finally, we didn't necessarily address some key issues which were there for many years.
The cost of those mistakes? An extra 21,000 jobs cut and more shuttered plants. GM vows to sell Hummer, Saab, and Saturn and kill the venerable Pontiac. And they will shut down more than 2,400 dealers around the country.
And when these dealers come to you and say, we've been in this community for 100 years and we're the pillar and it's America, let me at least take a shot at this, what do you tell them?
We get it. We understand the disruption this is causing, particularly in smaller towns. But having 9 dealers in a city that only needs 4 dealers isn't really helping that community, because you end up with subscale dealers that aren't selling enough cars, that can't afford to invest in their own facilities to be able to compete next to the big guys. It's like a mom and pop grocery store trying to compete against Walmart. It's very tough.
Dealers aren't alone in their pain. There are also parts suppliers and bondholders, including small-town pension funds which lost almost everything. There are hundreds of plaintiffs, like the Dinnigan family, who believe a faulty GM seatbelt snapped the spine of 10-year-old Amanda.
We lost Amanda's rights to a fair trial.
They were hoping a lawsuit or settlement could help pay for her $500,000 a year medical bills. But after bankruptcy, the new GM isn't liable, and the old GM is broke.
So anybody with a claim against the old GM is out of luck?
Not completely out of luck, but it's certainly have fewer assets to try to go after.
As for the executives, of the 1,300 in North America, GM says 450 will be let go.
How much of your personal wealth have you lost?
A substantial part of my net worth has been wiped out. Certainly the pain has been substantial for everybody, but I think at this point you say, okay, it is what it is. How do we look forward to create a new valuable General Motors?
Henderson will try to do that with the most unusual arrangement an American company has ever seen. The new GM is now Chevy, Cadillac, Buick, and GMC. Portions of that company are owned by the union's pension fund, disgruntled bondholders, and the Canadian government. But the majority shareholder with over 60%? You. And your money in the U.S. Treasury. The president promises no government meddling.
No plant decisions, no job decisions, no color of car decisions. So we're not running these companies.
But several senators have lobbied the task force directly, and Congressman Barney Frank convinced Fritz Henderson to keep a GM parts center open in his district.
But how is that not government motors?
There may have been one or two isolated examples where legislators have attempted to influence the outcome of a specific decision, even more than one or two. But there's no case where the Treasury or the White House has attempted to dictate day-to-day management types of decisions.
But Ratner also admits it is the day-to-day management of General Motors that got them here.
People have a perception of General Motors, and I'm sorry to say much of what they perceive about General Motors has probably been true in the past in terms of slow-moving, bureaucratic, not cutting edge, and that has to change.
Can you give me an example of one or two things that you've done since you took over to change the culture at GM?
And I think speed, for example, speed of decision-making, something I've never had an issue with.
Just looking at the resume, you'd say there's no hope here, because there's nothing in anything this guy's done that called for creativity. But who knows? You can never predict who can pull a rabbit out of a hat.